Welcome back to another episode of Meet the Makers. Today I have Blair with me and a special edition, our first ever chicken on the podcast. So very excited for this episode. Blair, so excited to have you here today.
I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. We're glad to have you. Can you just tell us how you got into 3D printing? And for you, I know that you've transitioned this into a full-time business. So maybe like how you got into 3D printing initially and then what kickstarted you to do it on the business side?
My husband convinced me to get a 3D printer because he wanted to make Jeep parts. He and my kids were very into it. I don't think they ever made a Jeep part. And so through COVID, we had all these printers and they were constantly making things. I was working 60-hour works weeks because I was what was considered what did they call us at the time? An essential worker. So I was suffering some really bad burnout. I looked at my husband. We went camping up in Michigan. It's my first vacation in 2 years. And I was like, so I want to quit my job, take over the printers. And that's pretty much how it happened.
Man, I can totally relate to being burnt out during that period. And it's really cool that you've been able to transition into doing this as a full-time thing. A lot of people, I think, who have printers, it's like the dream to do this full-time. So many questions there, but I guess starting out, like, what printers are you guys running in the day-to-day? How many printers do you guys have to keep this operation going? And what does that side of things look like?
Just for perspective, I have replaced my corporate income with this. I do show every weekend. And I was brutally reminded by my friend Kyle, who is STL Life on TikTok. He brutally reminded me a couple days ago that I'm up to 60 printers versus 50. I run all different kinds of machines. My theory is a lot of people run the same machine, but as a business, a carpenter has several different types of saws and several different types of hammers. So we have bamboos, we have sovels, we have anycubics. We have a little bit of everything. Truly a little bit of everything.
I think a lot of times when we see these print firms, people assume that you've got to have one type of machine or a bunch of a single machine. It's interesting to hear that you've had a whole different variety of things. For you in running those different machines, has there been anything that you have found certain machines maybe have been better for certain types of prints, or any machines that maybe you would err on people maybe erring away from?
Absolutely. Of course, Bamboo Lab is like the go-to standard for everybody right now. But as everybody knows, Bamboo Labs has several different types of machines, a lot like buying a car. We have 4 of the X1s that are originally from the Kickstarter.
Oh,
And we have actually managed to figure out a way to run multicolored TPU with those machines, which is really cool. So that's
wow.
what they do. That's their job. They run multicolored TPU.
Interesting. Now I do have the EMS system, and I'm convinced that you can't run TPU in it. Is it inside the EMS that you're running the TPU, or do you have a different method for how you're doing that?
Yes. So these are the X1s. It's basically a P1S, but before the P1S existed, it's just got the LiDAR in it. What we have learned is that the tooling in the stepper motors don't get as hot. For some reason, they're not running as much power, and TPU melt at a lower point. But when you're running it through your regular AMS, it's melting and getting soft, and that's why you can't run it in those machines. But we've learned there's something different about the X1s. We have not, like the regular X1s, we've not taken it apart, but we just got lucky.
I've never, out of all the people I've talked to, nobody has brought that up before. It's very cool. I've learned something new today.
That's why we have so many different machines, because my husband's a tinkerer at heart, and I'm definitely an artsy person. We have all these different machines because he wants to tinker with them. I'm like, let's make this massive dragon skull. So we're a dangerous combination between the two of us, because I'm like, here's my vision. He's okay.
I think that's perfect for you being more on the vision side, the art side of things. Something I'm always so curious about for people who, especially people who go to shows or they're doing in-person events, things like that, especially when you guys were newer to this, how are you deciding what files to bring to shows and what to stock at your shows?
I tell everybody, print what you love. What actually started my business and made me say, I can do this, is that everybody's familiar with Matt Meyer. He's huge. I was one of his first 100 Patreon subscribers.
Wow.
And he had that axolotl model with the little smile. And I was like, this is it. This is what's going to launch. This is just the model. We still print that model to this day with the little smile on it. I paint the tongue and I paint the eyes. I don't run it on the AMS just because I feel like it gives it a little bit more of an organic feel. I do approach the business a little bit differently. I'm definitely more of an artist. than I'm making parts and I'm making just cranking it out. Every model, I change the paint job. It's a little touch of me and Matt versus just the generic. I want to say that's a huge part of what's led to our success in this is that we've taken it and made it our own, is what I really think.
That's something I hear a lot of people struggle with when they're first getting into selling prints is it can be saturated, especially if you're selling the more popular Cinderwing Dragons or Matt Meyer Make stuff. There definitely can, I've heard, be competition when you go to the different shows, but I agree. I think just having those little things that make you stand out are really important. Now, going off of that too, for people who don't know, and maybe maybe people newer to 3D printing or newer to selling 3D prints, a lot of times people will subscribe to Patreons or different places where you get the licenses to sell these different types of models. For you guys today, there's so many options out there and there's so many people offering files. Do you stick to what you know, or do you find it tempting to dabble in different things? And how do you decide on what's worthwhile and what's not worthwhile to subscribe to?
A lot of these Patreons are so inexpensive and it's relative. It depends on what your startup capital and what that person starting their business needs. But so when we first started, I think we started with so we were at $60 a month on Patreons and subscriptions. We printed what spoke to us, and very rarely did we not make the $60 back when we first started. We don't print all of one artist. We cherry pick what we really like, and that's what we print. And we do sell a lot of articulated toys, and we do sell the dragons because the artist, and I love to use Pie Games as an example. He just struck gold, and his success has made success for everybody in truth. So I do my best to follow the trends, and then I put in things that are a bit of me as well. I know a lot of people don't want to sell the articulated dragons, but I feel like at this point, it doesn't matter what kind of 3D prints you're selling. We sell a lot of gaming terrain, but we still take dragons with us everywhere we go, just because that's what's hot right now.
The dragons seem to be through the test of time. When I first got into 3D printing, I had initially thought to myself, how much longer could dragons be popular? But even today, they still seem to be a very popular choice and people still seem to really love them. They really stood the test of time for 3D printers.
I think they made a resurgence. They were very difficult to print before the bamboo era. The bamboo came out and it made them easier to print. The same thing with the axolotl. My husband and I was like, there's no way we can conceive. We've sold the axolotl by Matt Meyer for 3 years now.
Yeah.
And so we're going on 3 years. And now I'm like, okay, so we don't have to carry around 27-gallon tote of these things anymore. So I just think everything kind of phases in and phases out. I do think different types of machines will change what becomes popular. Cinderwing was hard to print 3 years ago. You're an Ender girl. It was hard to print, but the Bamboo Labs has made it easier and more functional and more affordable. Back when I started TikTok, people were selling dragons for $60 and $70, where they don't cost that to make anymore.
I can definitely relate back to my first dragon that I made on my Ender. And at that point, it had felt like such a big accomplishment. I remember pulling it off my build plate. I was so proud of myself. Nothing went wrong. And yeah, it's definitely the game. Even I've only been 3D printing for a couple years now, and it's completely changed with Bamboo Labs coming on to the market. I think that's a good point for us to pivot on the conversation a little in terms of printers that are out there for hobbyists like myself, for people looking to get into it nowadays. You have experience with a lot of printers out there. The holidays are coming up. If they're looking for kids or maybe a family member, different people out there, is there any, maybe one printer or a couple printers that you would in particular recommend for beginners out there to start out with?
Yes, but my first question is always, what are you trying to print? Because everybody's trying to print something different. When I have a parent come to me with a youth, it's always the A1 Mini. This may make some people cringe, and I'm sorry, but I always recommend it without the 4-color system. Start with a single color. The 4-color system is very cool, but it just adds a layer of complexity that especially youth don't seem to have the patience for. So I always recommend starting with a single color. And then those who are just looking to add to their farm, we get a bit more spicy with the Sovol SV08, or we start talking about the larger format printers. Yeah. And of course, the Bamboo Lab P1P and P1S is where we typically go to start. I'm excited to see some of the new things that Sovol has coming out, but the ecosystem for Bamboo Lab is just so smooth. I get a lot of questions about the Anycubics, and they're just not as polished of a product. A lot of people really like that price point, but they have a lot of what I like to call creality quirks. The software is just not as polished as a Bamboo lab. You're going to save yourself a little bit of extra headache by spending the extra couple $100.
Yeah, I will say I've gotten very spoiled recently by being so used to printing out iBamboo. I also have stamp makers, and I just recently got a new one that I've been printing on quite a bit. And it's a great machine. I love it, but from a software standpoint, it's not as well rounded, and it's not as out of the box for a beginner. It's simple. For somebody like me, that's fine, and I'm able and willing to overcome those. But for somebody who's newer out there and kids and all that stuff, I think Bamboo it does really have a very seamless experience, which a lot of people enjoy.
For a first printer, it's very seamless. I'm having a lot of fun experimenting with the Anycubics, but I definitely think the price point is very exciting to a lot of people. I think that's a great second machine.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really do. But yeah, I am on the Bamboo train. So
If hey, you and me both. I'm not gonna knock you on that one. Yeah, they're great machines, and I actually do agree with what you say. I don't have the A1 series, but I do have the standard EMS on my P1. Out of all the problems that I've had with this printer, I would say 99% of those problems have come from the multicolors. I know it's really tempting for when you're new to printing. I thought it was just such a cool feature, and it's really tempting to want that multicolor, but I agree. If you start with just the printer, it's going to give you a much better foundation before you're adding complexity.
I think the multicolor is awesome, but I don't recommend starting with the multicolor units for anybody.
Now, pivoting back, so we've talked about printers, but pivoting back to your business, something interesting that you had mentioned is running costs. And especially in the beginning, you had mentioned, I think at the time you had 6 different Patreons you were subscribing to. We'll call it about $60 per month in cost for that. And then the cost of your initial printers. Would you say those are mostly the hard costs that people have to come up with when they're starting that business, or any other, I guess, Filament too, any other costs that were unexpected or investments that you had to make at the beginning of this process?
So when we started, we dove right in. We took a huge risk and invested a lot in printers to start up with. But my dad was big in saying high risk, high reward. So we were very careful, but the printers are the hugest cost. Anybody who's looking to start their print farm now, I would add the cool plates to their machines as a startup cost. It's something we're adding to 60 machines now, which is quite expensive. But we have found that in the long run, it's going to help adjust your utility cost. The printers themselves don't add a whole lot to our utility bill because we had them all placed in our basement. So it's not affecting the temperature of my household. But that is something that where your printers is placed is really important. If they're right next to your thermostat and you've got 15 printers running at 55 degrees on the bed, plus a heated nozzle, your home gets really hot really fast.
That's actually, I never thought of that. Being a hobbyist, I have about 6 machines now, but I typically will only run one at a time. So I never really thought about that. But yeah, if you've got 50 plus machines in there, you've probably got your own personal sauna in some of those rooms.
It is so hot in that room. I have a set of clothes that I keep down in the basement because it's cold upstairs. And then I go downstairs and I'm sweating. And so I have to change clothes because it's just like I change between going in the basement and going upstairs. But yeah, I have had a lot of people who've bought printers who are like, my electric bill went through the roof. Where was your printer sitting? It was in my living room. I was like, is your thermostat in the living room? Yeah, that's why.
I'd never thought of it from that perspective. I guess I had always wondered if running that many printers, it feels like it would be a high draw machine and probably pull a lot of power, but I guess it's more so probably that heating and cool. I guess it would be the cooling cost that's more so affecting people's bill. That's interesting.
Yeah, so we have them all crammed into a small room in the basement. The door stays closed. It's always very warm. So our machines are not drawing a lot of power heating up and cooling down because it always stays very warm down there. I was having my own little heated chamber, I guess.
Yes.
But yeah, so utility cost, and it can vary. Everybody's state has different utility costs, but that's
Yeah.
the biggest cost you need to factor in is where are you going to keep them? How are you going to keep them? And shelving. So we've probably got $5,000 invested in just shelving
Wow.
to hold all the machines.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's another thing I often forget. Again, having just a couple machines, you can throw them on this table, that table, but those shelves that you guys have probably have to be pretty high quality to not have them shaking all over the basement. Yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't
they're
think about
like,
that.
it's industrial shelving. So that's another cost. That's another thing that people forget is where are you going to store your machines? The filament storage is easy. We just use shoe racks from Walmart, but putting your machines up is costly.
It's so interesting talking to you. There's so many things I would have overlooked. For you guys, I know you mentioned the axolotl sounded like a tipping point where you were like, yes, this is going to be successful. Was there any point in you guys doing this? I feel like everybody for business, there's good days and bad days, but was there ever a point where you felt like, I'm not sure if this is going to work. I'm not sure if this was the right decision or space?
All the time. Making your hobby your business is definitely a choice, which is how I ended up with chickens because I had made my hobby my business. It can be exhausting when you have a bad show that you've spent $1,500 to go to and you make only $1,500. It can be very frustrating, but there's so many factors that are beyond your control. You just can't let that
Yeah.
bring you down. A lot of people I know who are trying to start up on the internet is very hard just because the competition is so stiff. It can be very discouraging. I refer to my friend Kyle a lot because he's in the startup phases and we're talking it through and I've been through it. But you go to the show or you get this high of, say, you have sales that are just astronomical and then the next month there's nothing.
Yeah.
And it can just wear you down as the adrenaline rush comes back.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And I guess something I didn't think about with the show is there's a lot of elements that are outside of your control with something like that. For you guys having done this for a couple years now, like I'm sure there's been times where you guys have gone to shows and maybe the weather's bad or the turnout's just bad. In situations like that, how do you decide, is this a bad show to go to in general, or was this just like a fluke bad time for that show? Is that ever a hard decision to go back to a show in the future?
It can be a hard decision, especially when it's weather related, but I've learned that good shows, people are gonna turn out. We
Yeah.
did a show in the middle of Helene, came up in Indiana, brought wind and rain, and it was awful, but the show went on. It was rain or shine, and it was a great show because it was a community-based show. They did a parade, and they had, all the kids are out there. It was hard to decide to go and power through 60-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we did it and it was great. But then we've gone to shows where it's been super sunny outside and just nobody has shown up. I don't want to put on the promoters. It's not always their fault, but a lot of times it is because there's too many things going on in the community on that weekend. Or I live in Indianapolis. There could be a Colts game and I didn't know there's a Colts game and
Yeah.
nobody goes anywhere when there's a Colts game. There's just a lot of things that can factor into it.
I'm originally from Buffalo, and if it's a Sunday and the Bills are playing, nothing else is happening.
Nothing's
It's a religion there.
We usually do a show 2 or 3 times before we give up on it. We have some gaming conventions that we won't be going back to this year, not because they were bad shows, but because it was hard to justify the money that we made going. So,
Yeah.
we usually go 2 or 3 times before we say no.
Makes sense. For you, having done this for a while now, and you've had good days, you've had bad days, would you say that there's any type of personality that lends itself really well to getting into this, and anybody who you think might struggle a little more doing this type of business?
I've learned that it's definitely a game of time management. So, time management is a core personality trait I think that a person has to have in order to do this and be successful. You can do it and you can love it and you can do it as a hobby and a side hustle, and that's great. But anybody who's looking into doing it full time, biggest personality trait they're going to have to be successful is good time management. That's the managing the printers. I quickly learned that if I was running a print that was 5 hours, I spent way too much time in my print room swapping machines. And then I wasn't spending enough time working on my website because I was swapping machines too much. So it's
Ah.
definitely an art of time management in order to truly be successful.
Now, it's interesting here you say a print that's 5 hours. You said that as though that was a short print, whereas for me, and as a hobbyist, if I run a 5 hour print, I'm like,
Yeah.
a long print that I'm running.
Yeah.
Am I accurate for saying that's a shorter print for you guys to run?
That is a shorter print for me. If I slice it and it says 5 hours, I'm like, I want a print to run 12 hours. That's what I want. Ideally, 20 hours, because then I can start it, it'll run, and then it'll be finished by the time I wake up the next day.
Mm.
That's what I really like. But yeah, if I run a print that's 5 hours on a single machine, that it doesn't really work for me. My machine has to be running, netting about $75 a print for
Mm.
it to be worth the time. If I'm printing little tchotchkes, like the little dinosaurs that everybody sells, or
Yeah.
Zal 3D, I need that machine to be running at least 12 hours for it to make sense for my time. When you're running 60 machines and you're constantly swapping prints. It can be exhausting, especially on filament change day. I dread filament change day.
Now, filament change day, is that how often does filament change day come for you guys in a week or in a
Every
month?
2 days. Every 2 days is
Oh,
filament change day. And now the AMSs I change more frequently, but they're so much easier to change. All my systems that are single color, we've got like little mounts that we have to hang up. We got to feed it through. And the AMS is just easier to change the filament on. It doesn't stress me out as much as changing the single color machines.
you seem like a numbers person. You seem like you might know the exact number. How much filament do you guys go through in maybe a course of a month or a week?
Let's go for a week, but 150 to 200 rolls.
Wow. Man, there's
Yeah.
honestly probably more spools than I have gone through since I have started 3D printing.
Yeah, it's a
For
lot.
for you guys, are you just buying out a micro center? Are you guys buying in bulk? That's a lot of filament.
This is where the artist side of me comes out. My husband is very tolerant with me in this. I order my poor Amazon guy. I probably should get him a Christmas gift because every morning when I'm doing my stuff, I am searching for filament deals on Amazon. When Micro Center puts their filament on sale for $14.99, I buy them out. They know me.
Wow.
I go to the Indianapolis one, the Sharonville one, and then Black Friday. I actually have a 2-day Micro Center planned for Matt. He'll be going to all the various Micro Centers to pick up filament because there's particular filaments that I just really,
Yeah.
and you can only get them certain places. And while I know that Micro Center, some of their stuff is by Polymaker, and I could order it through bulk through Polymaker, it's still cheaper to buy it on the sales through Micro Center. I have just recently started ordering bulk through Anlin because Anlin now has all the colors that I really like.
Yeah.
So that hopefully that'll help.
That is a lot of filament. I was
It-
not
I
expecting that.
didn't realize how much it was until I did my first bulk Anlin order. And then I went to look for a specific color and I was like, Matt, where did all, because he sorts it all for me. I was
Yeah.
like, where did this color go? And he's like, you used it all? And I was, do it again.
Now, going off of that, you mentioned time management being a a really important, crucial skill that somebody should have getting into probably not just 3D printing businesses, but any business. But you also seem to know your numbers really well. You know how much a plate has to be worth to make it worthwhile. You know your filament, how many orders are coming in. Are you natively somebody who's really good at numbers? Like, is that natural for you, or was that something you've had to learn and get used to doing this?
It's something that I've done all my life. My dad was an entrepreneur. My husband, he's also very numbers minded. Ever since college, I have worked in distribution. I was a grocery broker for the Defense Commissary Agency
Okay.
and managed grocery items for Unilever and who else? Sorry, there's 50 or 60 brands that I managed just their warehouse inventory and how it went from commissary to commissary on the Air Force bases.
Okay.
My next job after that, I did the same thing for Pepsi. I was managing their Gatorade and all that stuff. So the in and out is what makes sense to me. This sounds terrible, but a lot of the people who worked for me, they were paid by the amount of cases that they put out. So I had to make sure that if I order 5 cases of shampoo, it wasn't going to be worth their time because they're going to make $5. So I
Yeah.
guess it all tied into this to where I figured out, okay, I can do this and make it work. It doesn't sound like it all linked together, but when I really sat down and thought about it, I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense to me.
No, it totally makes sense. And I think for me, I still work. I don't know if I would call it a corporate job or a startup company, but I still work a normal job. There's so many skills I do in my day to day there that translate into other things that I do. Do you think having that background in like those skills that you learned at your previous job, not to say that like you couldn't have done it without those, but do you think that was a good path before coming into this business?
It was a good path into teaching me how to run my own business. It really did help me. I've always wanted to own my own business and treated the businesses that I worked for how I would treat my own business. So that's how it prepared me for doing this on my own. Yeah, without those previous jobs, there's no way I could have done this. No way. I would have been completely clueless. I wouldn't have understand how to calculate my loss. Our math goes down to how much filament and fails we have. And then everybody asks me how many fails I have, and I don't really have a whole lot of them. But then I do because I catch them. This is my full-time job. I can see it
Yeah.
failing before it fails, if
Mm.
that kind of makes sense.
I'm trying to think of this timeline for you. So, yeah, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly, you said that you've been doing this for 3 years full time now, or am I messing that up?
This has been my full-time job for 3 years, and we've been printing for about 10 years.
Gotcha. With that timeline, when you guys first started getting into this, were most of your machine Bamboo Labs at the time, or were you guys doing different machines?
Our first machine was basically a set of instructions that my husband bought and an extruder. And then the instruction told us what pieces he had to go buy at
Mm.
Home Depot. I don't have the photo with me, but if you scroll through my social media, there's a picture of my son. It's basically a Delta printer. So an FL Sun, if you're familiar with that,
Yeah.
it had cork on the bottom of it and these metal plates, and we used tape and we used glue. And my house was covered in these XYZ cubes. Is not for me at that point in time. I was like, this is great. You guys can, I believe they were using weed whacker wire
Oh,
as filament. Yeah.
jeez.
Yeah. So when my husband got our first, the SVO1 Pro, that was when I was like, okay, this is manageable. That was the first machine for me. That was about 7 years ago. We got the
Okay.
SVO1 Pros.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I was curious when the bamboos got introduced, did that, I know for me that significantly cut down on how often I was experiencing fails. Was that a game changer for you guys, or how did that kind of affect things?
It was a game changer. The true game changing machine for us was the Sovol SVO6. It's basically a Prusa clone.
Okay.
It was a $250 machine, no bed leveling knobs. It had dual Z axes. It had stepper motors on each side. And my husband and I looked at each other and said, are we going to take this gamble? So we had already ordered at that time as the Kickstarter, right around the same time as the bamboos. We had ordered 6 off the
Mm.
Kickstarter. And I said, yeah, let's do it. So we ordered 15 of
Wow.
those Sovol SVO6s. And those were the true game changer for us. And then the Bamboo Lab showed up 6 months later, and that was a new game changer. But at that time, all they had was the X1 Carbon. So you're talking about $1,500 for a machine, whereas those Sovols were $250. They're basically Prusa clones. They're wonderful. I still have them running to this day. They just print little sea creatures is all they do now. And I don't know if you Spin City, you might be younger than me, but there's this dog on Spin City, and that's my Sovols at this point. They're like, just put me in retirement. Please.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool that you still have those and they're still running. When the bamboos first came out, that's when I first got into 3D printing. And maybe it was a different experience for me because I was so new to the hobby at the time. But for me at the time, I was like, I can't imagine spending that much on a 3D printer. When you guys first got those, was that crazy buying those, or did you guys feel confident in that purchase?
We felt confident in that purchase just because Kickstarter is always a gamble. But the
Mhm.
amount of work Bamboo put into putting the machine out there during the Kickstarter for everybody to see made us very confident in the machine. We had no problem pulling the triggers on the Bamboo. Where we really struggled with pulling the trigger was the Prusa MK3S Plus, because you're talking about it like a 30-hour assembly time on that machine. Beautiful quality prints for the time, but they were just so hard to put together. And you could buy them assembled, which was fantastic, but it was $1,200. It was the same
Right.
price as the Bamboo. When we were deciding which route we wanted to go, at the time we bought our first Bamboos, we had 4 of the Prusas, and then we had the 15 Sovols. And when the first Bamboo came, my husband was like, we're not buying any more Prusas.
Yeah.
Sorry, Prusa gang, but yeah, we were like, no, we're not buying any more of these. We're sticking with this. And when the MK4 came out, I was pretty excited, but I was already married to that Bamboo Lab ecosystem.
It's like another piece of the puzzle that I didn't think about, but probably when you have that many printers, like assembly time on a printer is have to imagine it's a big deal when you're assembling that many. Is
It's a
that something
huge
you guys
deal.
have to factor in now when you're buying these printers of just that time alone?
3 years ago, yes. Now, no. Now, most printers just come out of the box. Bamboo Lab changed that.
Yeah.
The 30-hour assembly time is no longer. Actually, I'm really going to say Sovol changed that, because when we bought our Sovols, we ordered 15 of them, and Matt had them all put together in 2 hours, which in that time, that was absolutely unheard of. The technology has changed so much. I tell people, if you're buying a printer, expect it to be like a cell phone. You're going to hear about the next latest and greatest in
Yeah.
the next year and be like, dang it.
I bought my P1P and I knew something was brewing. It was right when they initially dropped the price on them. About a week later, the P1S had come out. I was like, dang it, just missed it. But yeah, it's always something new is going to be coming out. And there's always the next greatest and latest thing. But even being an older model printer, I'll say I love this thing. No
Yeah,
complaints.
it's fun. I enjoy it. I'm very happy to be doing something that I love. And not that I didn't love my job before. I did. Short of my oldest son, everybody in my household likes it. And he doesn't dislike it. He's just too cool for us, if that makes
This definitely
yeah.
makes sense. As we wrap things up here and pivot out of 3D printing, I do have to ask, because you have Chong over here, I have to know more about life as a chicken owner. That is one of my dreams in life in the future, to live on a piece of land with chickens and all kinds of other animals. It sounds like it's become like the replacement hobby for 3D printing for you. How is chicken ownership life for you?
It's awesome. I was very anti-chicken. We moved to Indiana. We have 5 acres of property, and my husband and my sons were pushing me for chickens. And they're pushing me, and I was like, I can't have chickens. Not because I didn't like chickens, but because I knew what I would become. I knew that they were just going to make a monster. So they're wonderful. If you're not dog owner, they're like, we have dogs. I love dogs. I got chickens, so there's no more dogs. Chickens. They're just so easy. They just hang out outside. They poop a lot. They're smarter than I thought they were. I thought they were going to be dumb, but they're not.
You're our first guest to have a chicken with you, but I'm surprised how, I don't know if tolerant is the right word, but surprised how happy it is to just hang out in your arms.
My husband was like, what have you done to our roosters? And I was like, nothing. I haven't done a thing. He was, stop holding them. They're supposed to be. I was like, yes, I'll hold them forever. Isn't that right?
I hear you talking about me. I'm over
Yeah,
it now.
Yes.
So I think my working knowledge of chickens is very limited, but I think he's a rooster. So I don't think he lays eggs. Do you have any chickens that lay eggs for you?
I have 2 roosters and 10 hens right now. So 10 that lay eggs.
Do they lay eggs every day? Is that a regular thing that
Yes.
just happens? Or is there like
I mean,
a
different hens
period?
lay different eggs. It just different chickens do different amount of egg laying. Most of them lay 1 to 2 times a day. We have a lot of eggs, which has led me down this. I've got my chicken conspiracy theory hat. It is that hobby that leads you down into the what is in my food train.
Yeah.
So I've started like making bread and doing all the homesteading things. I was like, what has happened? I don't have time for this, but yeah, they're a gateway to all the other stuff.
Yeah, I can see it being a slippery slope. I've gotten to it the opposite way. I started making bread this year. And then similar to you, I was thinking all the stuff in this food's so bad. I don't know if you have the same experience, but when I make my bread at home, I can eat a whole loaf of bread and feel just fine, which sounds crazy. But if I eat a loaf of store-bought bread, I feel terrible. So yeah, it got the wheels turning. And I was like, maybe chickens will be the next step.
I spent a lot of time working in grocery, so I know way more about food processing and food shipping than I think any one person should ever know. I'm not that kind of person where I'm like, only eat organic, that's not who I am. But at the same time, a chicken is cheap
Yeah.
and they are a food source. I have slaughtered a chicken. It's like a next level of independence. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
No,
My
it
mom
does.
thinks I'm absolutely nuts. I'm not dependent on anyone for anything. Now I can raise my own food, even if I choose to just eat eggs forever.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. I grew up in a family of hunters. I took for granted my whole life having access to really great quality meat that was basically free my whole life until I was an adult and moved out and had to buy my own groceries. It
Does
totally
go.
makes
My
sense.
dad is also a hunter. Here's a bunch of deer chili take home.
It's great. I've learned so many interesting things here today. As we wrap up, any final piece of advice for people who either generally are looking to start a business as a maker or maybe more specifically get into a 3D print farm style business?
Just do what you love because it's your job. If you're doing stuff that you don't like, it's going to ruin the whole thing for you. My husband and I have a regular debate because we are big nerds in our house and we do a lot of war gaming and all that kind of stuff. And we do sell the terrain, but I don't love printing the terrain. I love doing the dice towers. So he's taken that over because that's what he loves. So that's what he does. And it's enjoyable for him. And you're going to have an easier time selling what you love.
Yeah.
Versus, oh, this is the cool viral thing. I hate selling drawings. I sell them, but I hate selling them. I'm terrible at selling them. So that's my advice. If you love what you're printing, then you're going to love what you're doing versus doing it just for money. In the groups, you see a lot of people say, what's the best thing that sells so I can make money? That's not the way to look at it. Print what you love and you'll make money.
I think that's
Yeah.
great advice. For people who want to follow along with your journey, maybe they want to follow along with some of the things you guys are offering, where can people find you online?
I am Nerdy Chicken Schmidt because they won't let me use the other word on those. So that's my personal accounts. That's where I do all my business advice, talking to people who want to start a business. And then my business is A Critical Hit, which you can find as a Critical Hit 20 on everything. So that's like my actual business where I don't post all my personal stuff.
Blair, it was so much fun getting to know you a little better today, knowing about chickens, knowing about your business. I appreciate you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and do this. And with that said, that is Meet the Makers.